Welcome to another episode of Facts. I'm your host, Stephen Boyce. It's a little bit different today because we were supposed to do a live stream on Saturday. Now, here's why some of you are probably kind of confused, wondering what's going on. We did have a meeting with many of the people, part of the membership teams going into YouTube, and also those that donate on the side. We had a good time answering some comments and questions about the channel and also about Christianity as a whole. That was yesterday. I was also on another channel doing a pre-recording that will be released later this week on 2 Peter and the authenticity of 2 Peter, specifically the authorship behind 2 Peter. That'll be released also this week. So it's good to have everybody be patient as we go into another week and releasing things late. Some of you that are going to be getting this on the podcast side, I'm so sorry. It's going to be late. Hopefully you'll be able to at least listen to it on your way to work or something like that tomorrow. I did, however, release the article I wrote on the resurrection narratives, one that I've been promising for over a month now. I have been diligent. I intended on it being 1,500 words, and you know me, I failed at that. It ended up being about 3,300 words. And the reason for that is because I really hit an important point that we're going to cover today. We're going to look at the document. In fact, if you want access to that document, I uploaded it just a few hours ago on my Academia EDU page. You can find that link in the description to the video if you want more information, but we will cover that here today. I had already released it a few days prior to the members, as well as those that are a part of the giving. They received it through email. I sent that out in a PDF a couple of days ago, so they've already had a head start on it. So everybody kind of gets to introduce themselves to this today. It's Lenten season, folks. We're preparing for the resurrection. This is the time where Christians celebrate the most important part of the calendar for all of us. Now, here's the problem. There's a lot of people, on the other hand, who also want to take this time of year to criticize Christianity and say that the subject of the resurrection is fabricated, that things have been made up, and that there is no true resurrection of the human Jesus of Nazareth. Some would go so far as to say there was no Jesus of Nazareth. He is a myth, and he was not true. And we know these are the mythicists. I've debated many of them on this channel. I have debated them on their channels. You know who they are. Speaking of resurrection, tomorrow is a very, very important day on the channel. Dr. Bart Ehrman will be back on the channel with Anglican autodidact Jonathan Sheffield debating the resurrection of Jesus. So this is kind of a appetizer for the big debate tomorrow between Dr. Bart Ehrman and Jonathan Sheffield. Make sure you hit the notification on that. Also, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button if this is your first time. If you've been listening multiple times and you have yet to subscribe, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on the podcast, and this is one of the go-to places for church history that you've enjoyed going to, hit the follow and do us a big favor. A lot of you have done this, especially on your favorite platforms. It's been a really, really nice thing for you to do this. It's really helped boost the algorithm, especially on Apple, Podbean, and I noticed recently even on Spotify. Some of you have left us a 5-star review. That is a huge help. Thank you for those that have done that. Good to see everybody in the live chat. Caleb, Cameron, you guys are all good. Good to see you here. Feel free to interact. I'll interact with some of you at the end. I will upload a portion just for YouTube, and then I'll have one for you guys listening on the podcast. So again, if you want to go to the description, there is in the links 2 things. One, you can give outside of YouTube. You can be a member. You can do that for $3.99 or $9.99 a month. That is the option for you. Look through those on the membership. If you want to give outside of YouTube and also receive a tax write-off because we are 501c3, there's a link in the description for you on that. Many of those are getting emails monthly with updates, articles I'm writing, and also itinerary issues where I'm speaking at certain places. There is some really, really cool announcements that are coming as far as my involvement, especially in the Anglican Ordinariate, or as some call the personal Ordinariate. There are some new developments that have happened, and they are now official. I will be talking to you about that very, very soon. I'll be working and doing a lot of catechesis through the Anglican Ordinariate. So keep your eyes and ears open for those announcements. I'm really excited. It has been officially decided on my end as well as on one of the parishes. So there's going to be some cool news coming out on that. So keep your eyes and ears open for more news. All right, let's get right into the subject at hand. The question is, Do the Gospels contradict each other on the subject of the resurrection? This has been an age-old argument. When you look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the questions then become, do they actually have agreement? And can they be harmonized given some of the major problems that we find? I remember even as a teacher going through this portion of the apologetics courses, we'd always lay it out on the board. We'd put it out. We'd have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then we would put down everything that's the same. And then on another section, we'd put on everything that's different. One of the alarming things that always troubled many of the students was the amount of differences that are found, particularly in the resurrection narrative, compared to agreement. Now, on the surface, it sounds very bad and it sounds daunting, but the truth is it's actually a good thing. If we're looking for authenticity, if we're looking for eyewitness testimony, if we're looking for people who get accused of copying each other in the synoptics and other places, but all of a sudden there's uniqueness in these, then it should cause no frantic, no dismay, no fear for us as Christians, because it actually points to a more authentic narration of something rather than something that has been conspired or something that has been copied or something that is mythological in nature. Rather, we can see authentic eyewitness testimony as it relates to the gospel narratives when we actually get into the differences more so than where they actually agree. And so what I did is I finally put to writing some of the major arguments against the resurrection from the Gospels and showed that they speak to the really, in my opinion, the uniqueness and the authenticity of eyewitness testimony if we're looking for those kinds of things in the gospel accounts. So what I want to do is I want to bring it up on the screen. And one of the things that I want to point out is when we're talking about the resurrection, it is the most important part of the Christian faith. Everything hinges off of this being true or false. I mean, Christianity rises and falls, and rises in the actual literal sense. I mean it to be that serious. It rises with the resurrection. It dies and remains dead with the death of Christ without a resurrection. I mean, Paul even said this. He said, if Christ is not risen, we are the most pitiful people. We should be felt sorry for, and we are delusional at the end of the day. But if Christ is risen, then we are the most freed, the most purposeful, the most driven, and the most hope-filled people on God's planet if Christ is risen. And what are we basing our faith in? We say, well, of course, we're looking at the evidentialist side of things, or whether you're looking at the presuppositional or the classical approach to this. Some look at the minimalist facts. Some look at the maximalist facts. There's all kinds of fun debates that are going on, and even in the Christian circles, about how we prove the resurrection. There's everything from the Shroud of Turin to looking now at the itemized levels of going in and saying, well, can we now include the Gospel of Peter, for example, that has a resurrection narrative, even though it's not canonical? Does that actually help our case? Everybody is looking to put as many lines of truth on the table, any historical framework to say that tomb is empty. There was a body in it. It has been completely and supernaturally removed. It has not been stolen. It hasn't been taken away by his disciples. Rather, there has been a dead man who is in that grave, who came out supernaturally and appeared to people for long periods of time, and men and women saw him ascend into heaven in front of their own eyes. What are we in 2026 basing that on? Because there is a faith factor here. A lot of our identification of faith comes from the written texts themselves. And if the written texts themselves are incorrect, everything else kind of falls with it. Because the eyewitness testimony that we say that we hold to can only be preserved in the written tradition that has been found within the New Testament Gospels. And so what I want to do is I want to look at these gospel accounts. I want to look at some of the potential contradictions that we get spoken about. And then we're going to take our time and kind of evaluate at what point do we say these are good things where they differ, because our different does not mean contradiction. And I'm going to say that over and over again. So a difference does not mean it's a contradiction. There are things that have different perspectives. It doesn't mean it contradicts another perspective. And we're going to see itemized lists of this. So what I did is in the introduction, I talked about how the canonical gospels are constantly criticized and evaluated by modern critics and scholars. And they put, in my opinion, an unfair expectation on the text. And they treat the Gospels different than they would other works of antiquity. And we're going to look at some of those examples where the Gospels are actually using similar techniques that we see in Suetonius and Plutarch or in Tacitus. And we're going to look at these and say, you know, what we're finding in the Gospels is consistent with that time and period. Why do we continually impose modern thinking on ancient texts who don't think the way Western civilizations today think? These are ancient Near Eastern perspectives. They are looking at things from the perspective of a Greco-Roman view, which is not consistent with a much later post-enlightened world. And so when we put our later post-enlightened world and its mindset on these ancient Near Eastern writers, we've already started fallacious, and we've put on these texts an unfair predicament that'll never match our criteria of writing or thinking today. And as a result of that, we're going to easily snap the finger and say contradiction is all fabricated. If we allow the text to speak within the time frame and the working process that happened within civilization at that time, especially in the Greco-Roman world, and we allow these texts in harmony with other non-biblical texts to speak to how the writers wanted to convey stories and even use different techniques to do it, we'll actually appreciate the uniqueness and the beauty and the majesty behind these texts and allow ourselves to be wowed a little bit instead of constantly critical of what we call contradictions or what we call poor or sloppy writing from a modern perspective and from a post-enlightened world as opposed to an ancient world. And by that standard, I think we can protect ourselves from a lot of errors. So let's kind of get into some of the problems that get alleged onto these texts. And the big one is the women at the tomb and how many, who, and when, and where, and why. And so what I proposed in the first section is that the women at the tomb are overlapping eyewitnesses. And that when we look at the Gospels, we can actually see a little bit of segments. And I think this is something that isn't talked about enough. So let me give you some examples. I'll kind of read some of the writing. Again, this is mine. It's fresh off the ink is still drying on these documents because I just put my last edits on it first thing this morning. Let's look at the first line. When the resurrection, and again, those on the podcast, listen up since you can't read it. When the resurrection accounts are read together, the women who appear at the tomb are best understood as shared eyewitness pools, selectively narrated by each evangelist. So what I'm initially saying on the very beginning of this is that each writer has taken the resurrection story from itemized women. Now, there's going to be a common woman in all four. We're going to talk about her in a minute. Then there's unique women that are only unique to one. And that's where we start getting our differences, and that actually helps us, not hurts us. None of the Gospels claim to provide an exhaustive list of those present. And I want to repeat this because one of the things that I continually find is that we have limited how many people showed up at the tomb. I would be willing to argue that there are anywhere between 3 and 4 trips and at least 5 people, 7 if you count the men. And I could argue that there's more than that based on Luke's gospel. Now, we'll talk about that as we go through it. But wondering why we look at these texts and go, well, there's only really like 3 or 4 women here, and they're the only ones that witnessed this from the beginning, is actually not the case. And that's actually not the way the writers are going. They're not treating it as an extensive or an exhaustive list of people that were actually there. They're itemizing the women of choice for a reason. We'll get into that. Ancient historians regularly foreground principal actors within collective settings without enumerating every participant present. And I give an example. Polybius narrates a Roman embassy before Carthage by isolating a single spokesman while presupposing the wider delegation. And Tacitus, in his account of Tiberius's ascension, centers a scene of the emperor while treating consuls, senators, populace largely as a collective body. And by the way, I footnote that here in Polybius's Histories 3 and also in Tacitus's in the Annals 1, as well as in his Histories 1. There are multiple examples of this, folks. This isn't like, oh my goodness, the Gospels are doing something really random here. We've never seen anything like that. No, this is common where we have a major section of a writing with a lot of people involved, but they only highlight specific individuals for the purpose of making a greater point. The gospel writers operate comfortably within this same narrative economy, I write. Mary Magdalene appears in all four gospels and functions as the central female witness to the resurrection. And there's no doubt about this. She is in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. She's the only one who is in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That gives us a major role. In the Gospel of Matthew, she appears alongside Mary, the mother of James. Matthew can consistently foregrounds figures already established at present at the cross and burial, reinforcing. Listen, here's the thing. We're going to talk about Matthew. I'm going to come back to Matthew because I wrote a whole section about his technique of compression and compressing the text. And compression is something that he does all through his gospel, and I'll give other examples of that. He's not interested in the number. He's not even really interested in necessarily getting the precision the way we would want it to be given. He has an agenda, not an evil one, but he has an agenda. His agenda has been the same from the very beginning, that Jesus is the son of David, the son of Abraham. He completely rearranges and works his entire lineage group in the beginning to format that theme. He splits it into 3 sections of 14s, giving the Davidic number all the way from Abraham to David, from David to the exile, from the exile to Jesus. He breaks it down even in numerical and skips generations in order to keep 14, 14, 14 in his provision. Even how he does the temptation of Jesus as compared to the other writers of the Gospels, especially Luke, he's formulating even the temptation to identify kingship, prioritizing one over the other in the temptation, more so than, say, Luke's gospel in Luke 4. Matthew 4 highlights the kingdom offering to him. This initiation of Matthew, writing to converted Jews, utilizes Jewish techniques constantly through his writings to show that Jesus is the son of David. He is the fulfillment of the seed of Abraham. He is the prophet like unto Moses. And all of these things I've covered in multiple episodes in the past. Matthew's not interested in getting every detail right. That is not even the way he has formed the very beginning of his gospel, even in the lineages. So if we're going to all of a sudden allow him to continue that theme throughout the gospels, including in places like the parables, and then come to the resurrection narrative, and all of a sudden he changes who he is, he changes his style, and he changes the way he formats, well, then are we even being fair at that point? His goal and his agenda has been identified at the beginning and has yet to change. So he forgoes the specifics that we would all want to see, more so like what Luke does. He's not like that. But Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, are the only two that he mentions, and he mentions them with cause. Mary Magdalene fits this role precisely because this role is to reinforce continuity across the passion narrative all the way to the resurrection. Matthew's emphasis on recognizable and credible witnesses suggests she is named because she was already known within the community as a primary participant of these events. I'm going to continue to argue that Mary Magdalene is in each of the 4 because she was more prestigious and well-known amongst the Christian communities where these gospels were sent. And by the way, that would be, if we're looking for an archaeological connection to that claim, the Catholic Church clearly believes they have the relics of Mary Magdalene. Not so much for some of these other women. She was prestigious. She is prestigious. Further evidence of this, when you're looking at the Gospels, for example, if you look at the outside Gospels, say the Gnostic Gospels, and again, I use that term loosely, the Nag Hammadi texts, we start finding the Gospel of Mary, clearly Mary Magdalene. We also find Mary Magdalene becoming instrumental in the very last line of the 114th saying of the Gospel of Thomas. She becomes a prolific individual to the Gnostic communities by the end of the 2nd century into the 3rd. She is one of the most well-known followers of Jesus out of all the females. She and Mary, the mother of our Lord. Not Joanna, not Salome, not Mary, the mother of James. No, Mary Magdalene was well-known and even given some sort of credibility to where even the forgeries that were pushed in the 2nd and 3rd centuries sought to replicate her in their narratives, which really means to me she was somebody of great interest to the Christian communities and beyond. She was one of the most recognizable, and that's why I make the argument. She was already known within the community as a primary participant. In the Gospel of Mark, Mary Magdalene appears first in the list, followed by Mary, the mother of James, and Salome. While Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, appear in multiple gospel traditions like Matthew, Salome is unique to Mark's resurrection account. She is not introduced abruptly at the tomb, but is already named among the women present at the crucifixion in Mark 15, verses 40 and following. This continuity from the cross to the burial to empty tomb suggests that Mark is preserving a specific strand of remembering participants rather than constructing symbolic figures. The fact that he introduces a person that I believe is first, Matthew is, I believe, after. Again, of course, you guys know by now, I hope, that I believe that there was an earlier Matthew circulating in the churches in a Hebrew dialect. And that one is no longer used. The Greek Matthew we have today was formalized and finished by a group of eyewitnesses in Jerusalem after Mark. Not before, after Mark. So Mark would have been the established Greek gospel first. Matthew excludes her, where Mark makes her important. So to Matthew, she is not significant to his story, but to Mark, she most certainly is. So much so that Matthew didn't feel like she needed to be included in his text. Now that speaks to maybe the location. Mark's gospel is predominantly in Rome, written by John Mark for Peter. Matthew is circulating particularly in the Antiochian and the Jerusalem regions, sent from headquarters, ends up becoming the most distributed of the gospels, sent from Mother Church in Jerusalem at the time. Salome must have been somebody of importance in the West. There's theories about her, and we'll get into this. Because Salome is mentioned only by Mark in these passion scenes, historians have proposed she might have been known within the community behind the gospel. So perhaps she was a traveler who was with Peter or Paul or somebody of that sort. Some have suggested possible identification with the mother of the sons of Zebedee mentioned in Matthew. I do not hold that position, although some do. While others caution that such harmonizations cannot be demonstrated with certainty. What can be stated with confidence is that Mark preserves her name in context where eyewitness memory would have mattered the most. She is nowhere else in any other gospel. She's not even in Mark's gospel at the beginning. She's not a famous woman who was healed. She's not somebody who was raised from the dead. She is rather a random name at the foot of the cross that precedes to the burial scene and the resurrection scene. She must have been an identifiable name to the audience of which Mark is writing, so that she is known and a point of reference in defense of the resurrection and the death, so that she could be consulted on such a matter. That is my theory. Because Luke also neglects her name. She must have been no significance to Eastern churches where Luke predominantly circulated, nor in the Antiochian or Jerusalem regions where Matthew's gospel was dominant in that region and then circulated throughout the Roman Empire. Mark's gospel is the only one that mentions this woman. She must have been important to the location to which the Gospel of Mark was written. Her inclusion at both the crucifixion and tomb indicates she belonged to the group of women who followed Jesus from Galilee and remained present through the final events in Jerusalem. Salome's uniqueness to Mark, therefore, does not weaken the historical structure or the text of the account. On the contrary, it reflects preservation of a particular remembered witness within the Markan tradition, even when other evangelists chose not to retain her name. And again, Mark does this also in other places. He gives points of references when Jesus was struggling to carry his cross. Simon the Cyrene has sons. Alexander is one of them mentioned. He lists the sons of Simon. Now, there are indications in the other gospels that he had to be helped, but the sons are mentioned almost as a point of reference to the readers of Mark so that they can have validation of this story. Names that were mentioned, like Rufus and Alexander. Rufus is mentioned in the book of Romans. Mark was probably written in Rome. It could be the same man. It could be the reason. The church are very well aware of the scenes and stories, not just by the gospel, but by the oral tradition that has been taught and is being taught throughout the Roman Empire about the resurrection and the death of Jesus through others outside of these texts. Remember, folks, these gospel messages were circulating years before we get a written account of it. People like Salome would have been speaking about this regularly. Rufus and Alexander would have been telling their father Simon's story over and over again before Mark ever put it to paper. So we need to remember that when these gospel writers are dropping names, the same way Tacitus, the same way Suetonius, the same way Pliny, and all of these other writers do this. They're doing it as points of references that people would know to identify with. They're not exhaustive. They're reference points. In the Gospel of Luke, Mary Magdalene appears within a broader catalog of women, reflecting Luke's concern for public testimony and verifiable witnesses. The opposite of Matthew. Matthew isn't interested in numbers. He's interested in identifiable people. Mark wants a community name. So does Luke, but Luke's more of the historian that says that he wrote an accurate account, that he wrote a perfect account. I mean, he goes so far as to say he wrote a perfect account. He names Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and then explicitly adds this line, the other women with them. Now, somebody could say, well, he left out Salome, but he adds Joanna in her place. But the other women would also include Salome. Fair enough. That's 4. Here's the problem. There's 3 in his list, and he says, and the other women, plural. So there has to be at least 5. We could assume Salome is one of these. But we're left to guess who might be the 5th or 6th or 7th or 8th. We don't know. There are other women that follow Jesus. We could assume maybe Mary Martha from Bethany. Maybe Mary, the mother of our Lord, which would be really interesting if all 4 gospels didn't include her. And why? Here's a thought, and I didn't put this in the paper. What if Mary, the mother of the Lord, was there? Because she was certainly at the cross. But she was always named with somebody else. We don't know. Maybe they didn't want it to be a biased thing where a mother was trying to create a story about her son and create conspiracy and make it less verifiable. So they went with other women who were known to communities that could fact check and be people that could be contacted about it. We're only left to guess. But Luke is abundantly clear that he lists 3, but explicitly mentions there were other women with these 3. So there's at least 5. If we put Salome in there and then somebody else that none of the other gospels mention, There are other women that follow Jesus. Maybe the woman with the issue of blood. Maybe the woman who was caught in the act of adultery. We don't know. Luke doesn't feel really much more necessary to go in and go, all right, well, here's all of the names. He just wants you to know 3 and that there were others, signaling that his list is representative rather than exhaustive. Although I would say his is at least more indicative of how many than the other 2. This narrative move makes clear that Luke does not intend to isolate a single figure, but to preserve identifiable members of a larger eyewitness group, where it seems like Matthew is solely focused on 2 women. Mark has those same 2 following suit, but also wanted to add a community person like Salome. Now we have Luke saying, well, I want to include another woman that you guys missed, who must be important to him, but also admitting as a historian, there were others, but doesn't name them. Similar to Plutarch, similar to Tacitus, similar to Suetonius. Joanna is uniquely preserved in Luke's account and had already been introduced earlier as the wife of Chuza. Now remember this. He is a steward of Herod Antipas. Now she's a donor. She's a supporter of Jesus. She is one that is going to come in and say, you know, I'm going to give money, and they must have been wealthy, to the Jesus ministry. She's a part of the group first introduced with Mary Magdalene, who had 7 demons that Jesus cast out. She must have been radically changed in her life by Jesus of Nazareth, so much so that she becomes a follower and a donor for his ministry. Luke's big on this, by the way. Luke's big on the donor thing. That's probably who when he writes, oh, excellent Theophilus, when he's writing the beloved of God at the beginning, this person that he's writing both Luke and Acts at the beginning and attributing to, it could have been a donor of his project. He seems to be big on people that are financial donors for the work of the gospel. Here, he feels like he is obligated to give a shout out to Joanna. He adds her in a unique way that Matthew, Mark, and John do not. We know who she is from him earlier because he mentions her in Luke 8, that she is the wife of Chuza, the steward of Herod Antipas's household. So her prior appearance in Luke 8 situates her within a socially visible and politically connected environment, indicating that the Jesus movement extended beyond rural Galilee and the sticks, if you would, into circles associated with the Herodian administration. Her reappearance at the tomb therefore creates narrative continuity between the public ministry of Jesus and the resurrection proclamation. Jesus' ministry was far-reaching, more than just the people in the backwoods. He also had a massive influence on wealthy people connected to even Herod himself. Luke's decision to name Joanna at both points strengthens the impression that he is drawing from a strand of memory in which her role was remembered and transmitted. The inclusion of a woman connected to a ruling household underscores the social breadth of an early movement and enhances public plausibility of the testimony. By naming Joanna along the side of Mary Magdalene and other women, Luke situates the resurrection witness with a socially... Now, let me pause and explain this here. What I'm saying is Luke's agenda is very different from Matthew and Mark. We saw Matthew's a little bit. I already introduced that. Mark is just getting out just fact 1, fact 2, fact 3. Luke actually has an agenda as well. His is much different than Matthew. He seeks to show that Jesus is the Savior of humanity. That's why his lineage goes back to Adam, not just to Abraham. And he's seeking to show that Jesus wants to save the outsider, people that are not a part of the popular groups and things that are going into play here. Because at the end of the day, here's one of the things that he wants to show. Jesus is the savior of the outcast of society, like the person with leprosy. He goes after the Samaritan, the prodigal son, the one with a Greek name. He's showing us constantly that Jesus goes after the poor, the lame, the maimed, the deaf, those that are socially outside of the construct of what's considered good. That Jesus went after the most ridiculous and crazy people. Luke wants you to know Jesus is the savior of humanity. And so he's going to highlight that even the poor and the rich, those that are a part of rural areas of Galilee and Nazareth, those that are in Herod's own household and families, were all being impacted by the Jesus movement. Because Jesus came to, as Luke says in the gospel, in his parables of the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the lost son, he came to seek and to save that which was lost. And Joanna was forever changed by something that happened to her, whether she was demon possessed like Mary Magdalene, or she was somebody with an ailment and a sickness, and Jesus removed that from her. She became so radically changed by the Jesus movement that the money that was being paid to her husband by Herod Antipas became money that was funding the Jesus movement in Galilee and beyond. And that Luke wants to give a shout out to the donor of the Jesus ministry, showing that not only was she radically changed by Jesus, but became such a social follower of Jesus against the social tides of the Jews that she was there to witness the very death, the very resurrection that we today in 2026 hope and believe in. He felt she was important enough to put on the pages of Scripture to be a point of reference for the Christian communities, that she had enough credibility as a convert to Jesus from Herod, who had him put to death with Pilate, that she was credible enough to put out on display as a point of reference to identify the resurrected body of Jesus. Luke's doing something special here. Luke's doing something special. Let's continue. In the Gospel of John, Mary Magdalene becomes a primary narrative focus. John narrows from the group presence to an individual encounter. Although he doesn't ignore the group presence, he solely focuses on Mary coming back after Peter and the beloved disciple run to the tomb, find it empty. She has this one-on-one encounter, and I'm going to skip through this for the sake of time. She has a one-on-one encounter. As a result, she believes he's the gardener. Turns out it's Jesus himself. She has this wonderful, beautiful experience with Jesus, identifying the resurrection from a story that Matthew, Mark, and Luke do not tell. Again, please go read through this article. It's in the link. It's in the description. And I do see super chat, and I will get to that. Thank you. If anybody else wants to send a super chat, I promise I will get to all super chats. I will absolutely get to your questions. If you want to get a question in today, and again, we're going to go through the rest of this really quick for the podcast side as well as the YouTube side. I will take some time outside of the podcast side to answer any super chats that come in. Thank you for the one that I see. I will come back to it. If you want to get a question in or a comment, please leave a super chat. We'll make sure to do that. Also, if you're listening for the first time, hit the like and subscribe button. Also on the podcast, hit the follow, leave a 5-star, give us some sort of feedback. That'd be really, really great. All right, let's jump right back into the discussion here. So John has now brought in Mary Magdalene and gave a soul situation with her. I also give a statement about Mary, the mother of James, who she probably is. Please go back and read that in the paper as well. This is the part I want to end with here. Just a couple of things. I want to get into this. This is really important to me. Not only the identifiable women with their respective communities, and each writer having a specific reason for mentioning one and silencing others, etc. Now let's look at the staggered arrivals in the angelic position. This is the one I spend the most time on. And folks, I want you to know something. I thought really hard about this. Spent a lot of time thinking on this. I am convinced that when the women came to the tomb, They were not in a giant caravan of women arriving precisely at the same time. I'm going to make an argument in this article that the arrivals were staggered and that they came at different points, and the stories are told in each gospel from different arrival points. That's why we see different positions of the angels, and we're going to get into them in a minute and how many. In a modern era, with GPS, vehicles, watches, alarm clocks, we say, all right, church starts at 9 o'clock. Everybody be there at 9 o'clock. Some people are going to get there at 8:45. Some people are going to get there at 8:55. Some people are going to get there at 8:59. Some people are going to get there at 9:05. We all know who these people are, the people there that are early and the people that show up late every Sunday. Even in a modern time, when we have a meeting place, a designated meeting place, with all the modern technology we still have staggered arrivals to church. Why do we believe that would not be true in an ancient context? What was the meeting place? The tomb. What was the purpose? Bring spices. What time of day? Probably sunrise. More than likely, it was sunrise or at dawn, or maybe the night before, or dusk to dawn kind of idea. Maybe they had a plan the night before that says, at sunrise, we're going to go to the tomb. We're going to do all these things because Sabbath was over. They can now touch a dead body. They wouldn't be ceremonially unclean. All of the positives are there. John's gospel is very explicit that the women got there while it was still dark. Some almost imply they got there as the sun was going up. To believe that all these women who lived in different places, different homes, were all going to meet at sunrise, which seems to be the time, because again, they didn't have watches, at the tomb, that was their designated place and time, all got there at the same exact time, is kind of assumed on the text. Let me give you my thoughts here. Much of the alleged contradiction centers around the location and the number of angels. Matthew describes an angel outside the tomb seated on the stone. Mark places a young man inside the tomb seated on the right. Luke describes two men standing inside. John later depicts two angels seated where the body had been. Rather than treating these descriptions as mutually exclusive, the accounts may reflect sequential moments observed by different subsets of the women. This is my argument, folks. I spent a lot of time on that line, by the way. In the Gospel of Matthew, the narrative presents the angel outside the tomb. He's the one that came down, earthquake, moves the stone, sits on the top of the actual stone. Matthew's compressed scene likely reflects an earliest encounter, when at least part of the group first arrived and found the stone already rolled away. His focus is the dramatic divine intervention, the angelic descent, and the proclamation. Again, Matthew has an agenda. He's going to compress to make that agenda. Matthew does not linger on interior details, suggesting that his account may preserve the initial moment before further movement in the actual tomb. On the other hand, in the Gospel of Mark, the women enter the tomb and see a young man seated on the right. Mark names Salome alongside these other women, and it is possible that his account reflects a slightly later phase of the same morning. If additional members of the group arrived after the first encounter described by Matthew, the setting naturally shifts inside the tomb. Here's the thing. Mary, the mother of James, and Mary Magdalene are the first ones, because Matthew seems to depict the earliest act of the resurrection. Women are coming, earthquake, guards fall, tombs rolled away, angel moves that thing, sits on that thing. Here's the thing. There's only two mentioned. Could it be because they're the only two that could validate those moments of earthquake and guards? In comes Mark's witness, Salome. She gets there and doesn't see or experience some of those initial moments. When Mary are there, the angel is seated on the throne or on the stone. By the time Salome gets there, the women have already moved toward the interior of the tomb, and the angel is now not only there, but in the tomb, and now not sitting outside of it on the stone, but sitting on the right side of where Jesus laid in the tomb. And now comes Salome's viewpoint, and Mark is picking up the story on her arrival. It is possible that his account reflects a slightly later phase of the same morning. Additional members of the group arrived at the first encounter described by Matthew. The setting naturally shifts inside the tomb with, if you would, Salome. The angel is no longer positioned outside upon the stone, but is encountered within. Mark's description does not contradict Matthew. It reflects a different vantage point. I continue to write. In the Gospel of Luke, the scene expands further. Luke names Joanna among the women that we said are at least 5, at least, and describes 2 men standing inside the tomb. The shift from one speaking figure to 2 present figures is consistent with ancient narrative conventions. But the change in posture from seated to standing may also reflect further development in the sequence. Luke's broader catalog of women suggests he's preserving testimony from a larger group that has entered the tomb after the initial shock, which was Mary, and Salome. The angels are now described as standing beside the women, intensifying the proclamation moment. He is risen, just as he said, right? So it could be that Luke is picking up the story where Joanna has now arrived on the scene. Maybe Joanna is, she's a little wealthier. Maybe she wears a little bit more makeup, takes a little bit longer to get going in the morning. And she's that one lady that shows up at church at 9:02, where Mary are the, 8:50 people. And Salome is the one right on time. She gets to church right on time, 9 o'clock. Here comes Joanna every blessed Sunday. She's 5 minutes late. Could be that Luke is picking up on Joanna has now arrived at the scene, and now the development is no longer outside the tomb and just initial shock inside the tomb. Now the other angel is there with the other angel, and Luke has picked up on Joanna's moment of arrival, and now they're having conversations. What's going on? And now it's a collective story. All of the women he mentioned stories, which would include Matthew and Mark's story with Joanna. Now it's encompassed, and it is now an accumulative story in Luke's mind. I think this is what's happening within the text. Now, John's a little bit easier. In the Gospel of John, Mary Magdalene returns to the tomb after informing Peter and the beloved disciple. John's account isolates her later experience in which she sees 2 angels seated where the body had been on both sides. The scene clearly occurs after Peter and John have already inspected the tomb and left or departed. The angel's position differs again, but the narrative itself signals that it is subsequent visit rather than first discovery. So there's multiple visits. Trip 1, which has different scenes. That's all the women, at least 5. Trip 2, Peter and John. Trip 3, Mary Magdalene goes back. After they ran to the tomb and had already departed, she probably, as a lady, did not run, so it took her longer to get there. By the time she got there, John and Peter are gone. She now has this isolated situation that happens in John's gospel. Under this reading, the differences in number and position do not compete. They reflect successive encounters across the same morning. One group arrives and sees the angels outside, an angel outside. Others enter and see an angel inside. A broader group of witnesses see 2 angels standing. Mary later returns alone and sees 2 angels seated. The accounts do not require forced harmonization. Rather, They require an allowance for time, movement, normal dynamics of multiple witnesses arriving in stages. That's what an authentic account looks like. Copying and pasting and following each other's answers would create a higher alert than what we're seeing in our Gospels. Differences are not always contradictions, and differences are not always bad. Now, Matthew, I believe, is doing a lot of compression. Matthew is clearly compressing the event. This is section here in the writing. And again, if you're on the podcast, please click the link and read this when you have a chance. Matthew is clearly compressing the events. This is not a defect in his account, but a feature of his literary method, as I've been saying this whole time. Throughout his gospel, Matthew arranges materials thematically rather than sequentially, collapsing multiple actions into a single narrative scene. And I give examples. Look at this footnote. It's massive. Matthew frequently arranges materials thematically rather than chronologically. For example, Matthew 8-9, he gathers a series of miracle accounts: cleansing of a leper, centurion servant, calming the storm, healing the paralytic, Jairus' daughter, in a concentrated narrative block that highlights Jesus escalating authority over disease, nature, demons, sin, and death. By the way, all of which is fulfillment of Isaiah, and that's the point he's getting at. Parallel accounts in Mark and Luke distribute many of those events more sequentially within a broader time frame. Likewise, in Matthew 13, Matthew collects a series of kingdom parables: the sower, the weeds, mustard seed, leaven, hidden treasure, pearl, net, into a structured discourse. Whereas the parallels in Mark and Luke appear in more dispersed contexts. These examples demonstrate Matthew's deliberate topical compression as a literary and theological method rather than a strict chronological framework. Because Matthew's hit the most. In fact, I posted this, and one of the first responses I got was, well, what about Matthew and his contradiction of John? And I said, go back in the paper to the section on the narrative compression of Matthew. Read it again and again and again. Read the footnote. Is Matthew interested in having precision to be exactly the same exact way that Luke is doing it as a historical account? The answer, folks, is no. Matthew has an agenda he has set from the very first two verses of the book. He hasn't changed that. I just demonstrated how he did miracles and parables in that way. His collective scenery of the passion and the resurrection are no different in his methodological view than what he has done all through the gospel to that point. To now treat Matthew away from his narration and how he has done this in his method all along, and now put him to a different standard, is not the way we do historical frameworking. We can't do that. Can't do it. Again, thank you for those that have joined into the live chat. I do see your super chat. I will get to it. I promise. If you leave a super chat, I'm going to take time. I will absolutely interact with all super chats, as I always guarantee. If you want to leave a comment or a statement, feel free to do that. Let's continue. In Matthew 28, the angel's descent, the guard's reaction, the arrival of the women, the angelic proclamation are presented as a single dramatic scene. Again, read Matthew next to Luke. You'll see it. Read Matthew next to Mark, especially next to John. Light and day. Light and day over here and versus darkness and night over here. They are very different. Two different worlds and how they're handling this. Matthew does not pause to narrate intermediate movements or multiple visits to the tomb. Luke kind of does. He mentions that the women went back and told Peter. John says they told Peter and the beloved. Mark indicates that they're supposed to go tell the disciples and Peter. Matthew? Nah. Not at all. If we're reading Matthew, there's one trip. You read Luke, there's probably two, which included Peter. You read John, there's three. You read Mark, there's probably and possibly more than one. not definitively. Yet nothing in the text requires us to assume that he intends to deny such developments. Rather, he compresses the scene in order to foreground divine intervention and authority. Importantly, this kind of compression was entirely normal in ancient biography and historiography. Writers such as Plutarch, Suetonius routinely condensed complex sequences of events into a single narrative scene in order to emphasize character, meaning, or divine causation. And I give examples of this, by the way. A long footnote on Plutarch, specifically on the life of Alexander. I also give a long footnote on Suetonius and the 12 Caesars, specifically Nero and Augustus. Please read those. Please, I beg you, go and read this document. The link is in the description. Read the footnotes and all. It will not disappoint. And if it does, I'm sorry I failed you. I did all I could. Speeches are abbreviated. Movements are telescoped. Actions that have unfolded over time are presented as compact literary units. Ancient readers do not assume that such narrative shaping implied a denial of additional details. Selectively, and arrangements were expected features of responsible historic writings, I put. Because they are. Let's stop pretending like this is unique. Matthew's concern, therefore, is theological emphasis rather than exhaustive description. The guard collapse in fear while the crucified Jesus is vindicated. Earthly authority is rendered powerless when divine authority is displayed. The scene is crafted to proclaim the reversal and victory. The narrative drives towards the climactic declaration of universal authority at the gospel conclusion. All authority in heaven and earth is given to me. The Davidic king has been handed the kingdoms of the world, the one that Satan tried to get him to surrender by bowing down, that he would have if he just bowed down. No, he defeated that temptation, went through the cross, and took it by force, by defeating the powers, by defeating the angelic, demonic, oppressed, and those who have brought the world under condemnation through sin, both man and demon. He is the victor of both. He has now reversed the curse. He is now the authority over heaven and earth, and he has sent his disciples to go win the world for his kingdom. That is Matthew's point in telling these stories. It is all one thread from beginning to end. He is the son of David, the son of Abraham, the promised seed that would crush the serpent's head, the Davidic king who would have all authority, that would have a son on his throne forever and ever. He has now reached the climax of all things by the resurrection and the atonement that was shed on the cross through his own blood. All of that has been displayed in Matthew's presentation of his gospel. So therefore, to put him in the same group with John's gospel that has no intention of making that proclamation the same way, although it's implied, it is not the agenda of his gospel, is to insert absolute unfair comparisons. I don't like it. Quickly, one angel or two. The difference between one angel and two reflects the established ancient reporting conventions rather than contradiction. Now, I explained this a little bit with the positioning and I believe different women arriving at certain points. In ancient narrative practices, when multiple figures are present, an author may mention only the primary spokesman without denying the presence of others. Selective identification is not exclusion. I'll say it again. And I spent a lot of time making sure I articulated that well in the document. Selective identification is not exclusion. And I even left a footnote here, folks. This selective reporting phenomena appears elsewhere in the Gospels. Matthew refers to two demoniacs. Mark and Luke focus on one. Likewise, Matthew records two blind men near Jericho, while Mark names one. Similarly, Luke describes two disciples on the road of Emmaus, yet only names one, Cleopas, while leaving the other unnamed. In each instance, the narrative focus falls upon the principal speaker or figure without implying the non-existence of other presence. Sometimes one person is listed because they're the most significant speaker. Luke does this in Acts with Peter and John. Both are mentioned being there. We have no record out of John's mouth, but a lot of record out of Peter. Probably because Luke never met John or he didn't talk to John about that scene. He got it directly from Peter. And we know he passed him at some point in Jerusalem and Antioch when he was with Paul. So good chance that makes sense. It's a good chance when he mentions two disciples on the road to Emmaus, silences one name and gives credit to the other. It's because Cleopas was the man that gave him the story. And that was his eyewitness that gave him the report. We don't have to overthink this, folks. We don't have to overthink this so much that we miss the forest for the trees. The visit of Peter and John. Any serious discussion of the resurrection narratives must account for the visit of Peter and John. The Gospel of John records that upon hearing Mary Magdalene's report, but both men ran to the tomb. Now, of course, Luke only reports one. John arrives first, looks in, sees the linen cloth lying there. Peter enters the tomb, observes the linen cloths and the face cloth folded and set apart. This is the whole argument of the idea of like the Shroud of Turin, right? This detail is significant for several reasons. First, it confirms that the tomb was generally empty. John describes the beloved disciple as bending down to look into the tomb, using the Greek verb parakupto, a term that denotes careful inspection rather than passing glance. Same verb appears elsewhere in John 20, verse 11, and in Luke 24:12 in its literal sense of stooping to examine something closely and figuratively in 1 Peter 1:12 and James 1:25 to describe the attentive scrutiny. And I leave a footnote here, by the way. J.B. Lightfoot and the Cambridge Bible for Schools and Colleges with Lumbee, they talk about this idea, particularly in Ben Sirach, Sirach in the Sirach 14:23, the words used there, as well as Luke 24:12. So again, read all the footnotes too. So here's the thing. The narrative emphasis is not on haste, but on deliberate observation. The burial cloths are seen lying there. The face cloth is described as folded separately. Such details argue strongly against ordinary grave robbery. Thieves don't carefully remove and arrange wrappings. They take the body with haste. The description is quiet and concrete, the kind of incidental details characteristic of remembering experiences rather than embellished storytelling. Who's going to write that in a fabricated story? These are details, on the scene details, and John's full of them. Second, the description presupposes prior activity at the tomb. Peter and John are not initiating the discovery. They are responding to testimony. Mary's report prompts their investigation. Of course, they didn't believe her. This supports the pattern of multiple visits and staggered arrivals already evident across the accounts, which I just described. Importantly, the Gospel of Luke independently records Peter's visit to the tomb, noting that he stooped, looked in, and saw the linen cloths by themselves before departing in amazement. Luke does not mention John, but focuses on Peter alone, and that's because I argue that the synoptics have Petrine primacy. I'm not going to get into that tonight, but we've talked about it before. Meanwhile, by the way, Mark says, tell my disciples and Peter. Meanwhile, Gospel Mark records the angelic instruction of the women to tell his disciples, here it is, and Peter. Subsequent visit of Peter to the tomb in Luke and John fits naturally with the directive. Third, the differing reaction of Peter and John reflect the texture of eyewitnesses' behavior rather than literary harmonization. John states that he believed, while Luke portrays Peter departing in wonder, still processing what he had seen. The reactions are not artificially synchronized. They retain individuality and restraint. That's what we're looking for. Finally, the presence of Peter and John anchors the resurrection account within the apostolic circle. The women are the first witnesses in striking and unlikely invention in that culture and setting. Yet their testimony is quickly followed by inspection, leading the disciples who physically verify the empty tomb. Nobody's going to believe a report by a bunch of women saying somebody resurrected from the dead in the ancient Near East. Sorry, they won't. I even footnote here in Eli's writing the Jewish Gospel of John, Discovering Jesus, King of Israel. He mentions that. There's many, many more footnotes I could have put there, but he is a significant book that I'm reading right now on the Jewish Gospel of John. Phenomenal writing, by the way. Wonderful book, very underrated. It gives an interesting perspective of Jesus and his ministry to the Samaritans. Fun fact. The narrative thus moves from the angelic proclamation to the female testimony and to apostolic confirmation, forming a coherent evidentiary progression. So in conclusion, the resurrection accounts call for careful reading rather than quick conclusions. When we pay attention to how ancient writers told history, the differences in detail begin to make sense. Staggered arrivals, selective naming, compressed storytelling were formal features of ancient narratives, not signs of confusion. The visit of Peter and John placed the empty tomb in a concrete setting, describes as a real place that was entered, examined, discussed by multiple people. The Gospels were not written as modern transcripts, as I said at the beginning. They are testimonies shaped by memory and purpose, yet grounded in recognizable individuals and events. The variations among the accounts remain, but they do not cancel out each other. Instead, they reflect the way real events are remembered and foretold from different perspectives. Read in this light, the resurrection narratives appear less like artificial constructions and more like preserved testimony shaped within living communities. Again, folks, I cannot emphasize this enough. Please read the link in the description. This is my it just came out today, just this morning. So hopefully that'll be helpful. Hopefully this is good. Reconsidering the resurrection narratives, we should not be as concerned as critics and skeptics want us to be concerned with. Rather, it points to authenticity, uniqueness, splendor, and majesty in the writings. True boots on the ground, telling the story from their perspective. These staggered arrivals, all of these things point to an authentic writing of the Christian faith that was being lived and taught in these communities before these texts were ever written. And these individuals are significant to each individual community that was written to as a way to confirm the writing so that it validated that this was the testimony being spread in the community years before these texts were put into publication. For those listening on the podcast, thank you so much for joining this episode. Grace and peace to you. God bless. To those on the YouTube side, I am now going to take some of your super chats and your comments. Thank you for being patient. If you have a super chat, again, I will absolutely get to it. Leave a comment. Let's get to the first one. Thoughts on Jerusalem or Galilee order of appearance. Also thoughts on whether Wenham, ANC, Snable's book on this topic. Here's the thing. Wenham's good, by the way. I think that he's probably one of the more underrated. I don't understand why these guys like him and Robinson, for example, continually get a bad rep on the Gospels. And listen, I understand some of these guys. I said this to my friend Jonathan Sheffield the other day, and they hold to the Matthean priority, and I'm not. And you guys all know, I think by this point, that I have a unique view of the Matthean priority. I do think there was a Matthew circulating before Mark, but it's not the Matthew we have today. But some of these guys, like Wenham, some of these guys like Robinson, as smart as they are, and I'm not saying they all hold this position, smart as they are, some of them hold to those views that get ridiculed so quickly that the rest of everything they say is completely thrown out the door. So I think that they need to be revisited because they were actually very brilliant men and their thoughts on things are extremely good. So I like Wenham. I don't have a deep thought for you on the book topic, but thoughts on Jerusalem or Galilee order of appearances. I'm assuming you're talking about post-resurrection, especially given that Mark talks about tell my disciples and Peter and then meeting in Galilee and then later in Jerusalem. To me, the order, again, this goes back to Matthew, right? Matthew seems to indicate a little bit different than Mark, the location. And then you got to get into the whole long ending of Mark, which is a whole nother discussion for another night, folks. But when you're looking at it from that perspective, Matthew seems to imply a more Jerusalem look. So does Luke, by the way. Mark seems to imply more Galilean view. I'm assuming that's what you're getting at. And Oliver, if you're still in the live chat, please clarify for me at any point if I'm misunderstanding you. To me, the post-resurrection appearance being on Galilee in the order, it would be Galilee and Jerusalem. but or Jerusalem and Galilee, if you're looking at it from a compressed view or whether you're looking at it from a historical view. Because in some ways it looks like Jerusalem, Galilee, some ways it looks like Galilee, Jerusalem. Again, are we talking about compressed view? Matthew. Talking about historical view? Luke. Are we talking about something that where there was multiple appearances, even in John, that goes into his appearance to the disciples in the upper room, going back to where he touches him? All of these things are to take into consideration. But again, remember the technique. Matthew is going to compress. He has a narrative. He's going to link things a lot closer to Jerusalem. He's going to link things a lot closer to the kingdom divinity given to him from his father David. All that has to be taken into consideration. It's a great question on that one as well. Thank you for that super chat. And let's see, I've got another one here. Black MX3HC, thank you for the $5 super chat. What is your best argument to proving the validity of the resurrection accounts? Do you have any papers or books to recommend this particular topic? Well, you're in luck. I have a paper that is written on this topic. It is in the link on the description. We just covered it. And maybe you jumped in really, really soon. I appreciate that. Super chat. I did write one on this. I have done multiple discussions on this. I've done debates on this. Also, come back tomorrow, Black, because Jonathan Sheffield is going to give an argument for the resurrection that is really, really good. That'll be tomorrow at 8 o'clock on the same channel. So if you've yet to like and subscribe, make sure you please do that and hit a notification on that video. A lot of Jonathan's arguments I share, and I think they're really, really good. So my best argument, by the way, I am not a minimalist. I'm a maximalist argument on this. I know, so I heard somebody boo in the crowd. I heard you. I don't agree with Lycona. I don't agree with that viewpoint at all. But at the same time, I do think the differences in the narration of these gospel texts are a major, major talking point in our favor, which are used as a criticism and our weaknesses. And I don't think they're weaknesses at all. Thanks for that super chat. Again, if you want me to get to this, again, it's already late. If you want to get a question in, definitively send a super chat and I will absolutely put it on the screen. Otherwise, I cannot guarantee to get to it. Can you speak briefly on the time constraints that writers in the first century dealt with and how that could be a factor, seemingly contradictory account in the Gospels? Great, great question, Caleb. Thank you for that comment. Thank you for the super chat. Here's the thing. Not only the cost and time constraints the writers had, but remember, these documents are illegal. Everything in them was exactly what they needed or believed was needed for their audience. Luke seemed to have a Patreon going here who funded this. Maybe Theophilus was that Patreon. Maybe he was the donor. You are right. Cost and time is a major issue. Mark was not interested in it, and even how Papias of Hierapolis put this was like, not in any order. He just wrote down everything that he was told. Mark was not interested in chronology. Like, he wasn't interested in getting every detail right. Like, he's just interested in right. What did Peter say? Peter said this. I'm writing it down. Peter preached that part. I'm writing down that part he preached. So they are major factors in that time. Not only cost and time, the legal nature of these texts, the even agenda behind these texts, all fit into everything you're asking. They're a major factor when it comes to these so-called contradictory accounts because their purposes are different, their audiences are different, their time constraints are different, the pressure around them is different. All of those things are going to take into account changes or lack of detail or more detail than others as a result. It's a great question. It's a great point. Thank you also for the $4.99 super chat from Catholic Cam 33. We really, really appreciate that. Saw you at church this morning. I saw you at Mass. I think I walked by you right after Mass, and there's our wonderful priest, Father Christopher Smith, wonderful man of God, wonderful priest. Also, Caleb is in the parish there as well. Both of you guys together. Let's see if there was if I missed any super chats. Let me go in. There was a couple other comments, maybe. Tristan Parker, why is it that the veneration is so commonly mistaken for worship? Furthermore, with your experience in the Protestant church, we say there's anything that Protestants unknowingly venerate. Oh, great question. I joked about this at Christmas. At Christmas time, I always laugh when they bring out the nativity scene, because the nativity scene is basically a bunch of icons. And if they'd go to a Catholic mass, they would know that, especially how they leave the manger open up till a certain point and then put baby Jesus in. Also, they replace the icon. Like if you were to go to Prince of Peace Catholic Church, has one of the biggest displays in the nativity, human size, bigger than like human size camel. I mean, the Mary, Joseph, shepherds. Then you have like life-size camels, donkeys. The wise men are off on the other side of the auditorium, heading toward the scenery. I mean, they are a part of the iconography in the church. Baby Jesus is blessed. So, yeah, I would even say in a non-religious sense, Protestants do venerate without worship dead saints. Not intentionally. But I know a lot of Protestants who have pictures of lost or of deceased loved ones who are still hanging in their hallway or on a nightstand or in a photo album that they regularly visit to remember their life. I mean, that's what iconography is supposed to do. The early church was taken over by the side. They were all about kissing. I mean, there were rules and lineups of kissing for people in church and who not to kiss in passing the peace. I mean, Paul talks about greet one another the holy kiss. You think, I mean, he wasn't joking. Objects were kissed. Relics were kissed. By the way, this is one of the biggest reasons they were burning the bones of saints. When they were executing these saints, the reason like Polycarp and others, they burned to a stake is because the churches would have taken his bones and made icon kissings of the bones. That's why they burn people. It became a regular problem in the church. By the way, I did a whole thing on iconography on Swan Sona's channel. He and I did it. Also, if you go back in the archives, James Gilbert, who Tristan Parker knows, he and I did a icon discussion together with an Eastern and West twist. If y'all missed that, please go back and listen to that one. It was a good one. It was a very, very good one. Let's see. Somebody said that's a heavy camel. It's made. I don't actually. It's like I don't know if it's plastic or fire. It's something. I don't know what it is. It is massive though. I mean, it is the size of it. Actually, I mean, if you were to go to our parish, you would see it's the same size. Caleb says, if you visit the Billy Graham Library, even for a few minutes, you'll see the veneration isn't dead. People leave flowers at a statue, and don't forget the statues of the reformers in Geneva. Oh my goodness, yeah. The carving out of let's see, it would have been Beza. Beza's there. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Caleb. That's an excellent point. I mean, the Billy Graham Library is an hour north of me. Go right up to Charlotte. I've been to it multiple times. You're absolutely right. And now that he's buried there, people are constantly leaving flowers at his statue. He, pictures and all these things. Absolutely, 100% agree with you. This happens a lot. Apparently, there's a discussion going on in the camel weighs 1,200 pounds. Took me 8 men and piano rollers to move him. I named him Humphrey after the set. What? Is he that heavy? Caleb, are you serious? I had no idea. I mean, listen, I thought it was like plastic that you could like elbow and accidentally knock over. I did not know he was that heavy. Oh my goodness. Well, I guess that keeps people from stealing the nativity. I mean, that's one way to look at it. My goodness, that is Oh my goodness, that is extraordinary. I had no idea. Wow. Caleb, I'm glad you're on that committee and not me. I am so glad that you are on that committee, because if I get volunteer for that committee, we're bringing the chiropractor and everybody with them. That's crazy. I had no idea. Here's another question that came in. What do you think of Jake O'Connell's argument that the resurrection of the saints found in Matthew's account was an actual event and the ODs of Solomon independently attested to? I have actually heard that theory. Listen, the random story in Matthew about these saints coming out and appearing in the city of Jerusalem, which again goes back to what is Matthew doing in these texts by compressing these narratives. The form of compression actually makes me think this event is unique, and that there is an agenda to push toward the Jewish Christian community in writing this point, especially in the holy city, Jerusalem, that he mentioned. But I have heard Jake O'Connell's position on this, where it was an actual event that goes back to the Odes of Solomon. I don't know if we're ever going to be able to prove such a claim. Do I find it intriguing? Absolutely. Do I think it's something that we could write down in the possibility category? Yeah, but I really don't think we can put much weight to it. There are other theories that go around to it. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's simply a theory that cannot be proven. But by the way, Matthew, it would not be unlike him to do something like that. So I will say that. If I can give a positive statement in response, I will say that. All right, folks, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button on this video and on the channel. Do not forget to be here tomorrow night. Bart Ehrman will be debating Jonathan Sheffield on the subject of the resurrection. If you have not yet joined the membership, once a month, Pat and I are meeting with the members. We just had a meeting yesterday. We took questions. We took suggestions for future episodes. We did all kinds of good discussions back and forth. If you have yet to hit the membership, that's available for you in the membership. You can do the $3.99 a month, $9.99 as a council member versus a catechumen. Hit those membership opportunities that are in the description. If you want to give outside of that, and you can also be included in these meetings, you can be a donor through the link in the description on Tidely. You can give one gift, and that'll make you a part of the group where you start getting emails, because that group that gives there gets emails every month. They get updates, notifications, ideas. They are also given a link to that same discussion with the members on YouTube. So either way you give, you can be a part of those discussions with Pat and myself. Hit that link and give a one-time donation, or you can give monthly on a small amount or a large amount, whatever you want to do. It is a tax write-off on that side of the giving. So if you'd like to do that, feel free to do that. Thank you for those who have. By the way, I am traveling to Dallas, Texas. I will be in Dallas on April the 10th, 11th, and 12th. I will be at the Trent Horn Conference. He has invited myself and my wife. He's bringing us out. He's covered our ticket and our hotel while we're there. He told us just to get our flights. They are not cheap. My wife and I are going together. We will be there, and I think the cost was somewhere close to it was about $1,000 for her and I to fly. I couldn't believe it, for a round trip for two of us. So anything you give toward that, if you would like to give and help us, we reimbursed our crazy cost to go there. Anything you'd like to give toward that, you can also go to that Tidely link in the description. If you want to give just a one-time donation, that'll also get you on the email list anyway. That'll go toward that. That can help us. That'd be wonderful. But we're going there either way. We're going to be in Dallas. If you're near Dallas or you're going to the Trent Horn Conference in April, make sure you come see me. If you've never met me, my wife and I will be there. We'll be there with a bunch of other podcasters and content creators that are Catholic. We will be there. We'll be at the Mass Sunday, Lord willing, in the morning. We'll be flying out later that evening. Actually, I think we're flying out that late afternoon back to Spartanburg, Greenville. So that's coming up. If you have not bought a ticket for that and you want to go to that, go to Trent Horn and his website. You'll find the link there if you'd like to go to that as well. Love to see you. If you are there, you are there, please come by and see myself. Come see my wife. We'd love to meet you. Love to have a good conversation. Also, thank you, Stephen Xavier, one of our members. If members join in but do not have any questions at hand, we are free to just listen. Of course, we want anybody to listen that can. And thank you for gifting the One Facts membership. Thank you for doing that, Stephen Xavier. Somebody take up these Facts memberships. Grab that as quick as you can and join us so that you can have content that is designated only for you and you alone. So please join the membership if you have not done that yet. Thank you for sharing that, Stephen Xavier. So much. Appreciate you. All right, folks, that is all that we have time for today. As always, grace and peace to you. God bless.